Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. Since I'm preparing for a major tournament and need to dedicate a lot of time to training, I won't be able to record videos of I won't be following the footsteps or I won't be recording these recent top chess events as they happen. So I'm pre-recording this series. And this series, or all of these videos, they cover games where I study at my chess school. These games or positions are carefully selected by my coach, and then my coach will teach us, or trying to to teach us or help us understand more about this game or this position. And now I'm going to share these things with you guys, and I think it is also a great way for me to review what I've learned in the past. Alright, so now this is the position that we'll be taking a look at today. This game was actually, this position is actually from a game played by Magnus Carlsen. This game was played in the year 2000, and white is Magnus Carlsen. At that time, his rating is only 2625. Not only already it's a very high rating, but compared to what his rating is now, which is 2800, it's actually kind of low. And his opponent is, I don't know who his opponent is. Someone called Olzem Lothar, who is rated 2179. I'm not sure who he is, but he is playing against Magnus Carlsen, probably in some open tournaments. And in this game, we reached this position, and this is actually the most crucial position in this game, in this whole game. And before we start playing the moves, I first of all want you guys to stop and think, or to evaluate this position. First of all, to think who is better in this position, and then what are both sides' ideas, follow-up ideas in the future. I can tell you guys that in this position, black is slightly better, just slightly, just a little bit better. But of course, it's just some positional advantages. But in the future, black will be the side who is much more convincing to play with, or the side who is much more easier to play with. And the reason for that is, first of all, let's see what white's ideas are. In this position, first of all, you can see that, okay, maybe white does have larger space in the center than black does, and the knight right now looks more solid than the f6 knight, but that is just in the present. White doesn't really have any clear ideas. Even though he has a good setup, the setup is nice or looks solid, but white doesn't really have any good ideas. d5 is not playable right now because black has the pawn, the two pawns and the knight as well as the rook covering the d5 square. And c5 of course is not good because it will open the d5 square to black's to black's knight. Basically, white cannot do anything in the center with these two pawns. And if white were to go something well, actually here in this position it is black to move, but let's say if white will have if white were to have some ideas like f4, f5, it's just actually too slow, and you can see that black is already putting a lot of pressure on the d4 pawn. And if you go f4, you'll even open up this diagonal. The queen will be able to pin the pawn and the king, and I think white will be in a lot of trouble. And so basically, white doesn't really have any great ideas. And basically, white just needs to wait to see what black does. And looking on white's side, you can see that not white, but black side, black actually has a lot of useful ideas. Here, very obvious one is to go a4 to open up on the queen side, because the queen side is where black has the advantage, space advantage, as well as the pawns. The pawn is pushed much more higher than the pawns on the king side. And a4 is actually the main use for this move is to damage white's pawn structures and to open up more files. But also in the future, black might have some c5 ideas to force white to go d5, or like try to at least put more pressure on the d4 pawn. Another idea is actually first of all to trade the knights off with knight d7 and then double the rooks up on the d file to attack the d4 pawn. Basically, there are many ideas for black. And in the game, black played this idea with queen b4. Black knows that he is better and he wants to trade the queens off to open up files. Trading off queens will mean that in this position, black won't be able, will not have any losing possibilities once the queens are off the board. And of course here, if white were to take on b4, then this will be losing because there's now just a takes b4. Black successfully opens up the a file and gets the pawn to b4, an even better square. And now the a2 pawn is under attack. The d4 pawn is also under a lot of pressure, which means that this rook needs to defend 2 pawns with rook d2, but unfortunately there's knight e4, and white will have to give up one of the pawns, either a2 or d4. But then if white were to do so, white will be completely losing. Here the best move is actually to go f3 to prevent black from going knight e4, but this just simply loses to gives away a pawn on a2, and even though the advantage is still not extremely large, but I think black will be able to win after, for example, rook b2 or to double the rooks up on the a file. So let's go back, and that is why, of course, in the game, Magnus didn't take on b4 because that's just a dead lost variation. Instead, he played queen b2 going back, but now black is going for the other idea that I have mentioned, which is to go a4. Now it's even worse, worse for white because a4 is now more deadly. You cannot take because you're under the pin and you'll lose the queen. But if you don't take, then you'll just simply allow black to take, or even push a3 to open up files or gain more space, and black will be better. a4, and in the game, knight d3 was played, the best move, attacking the queen. Queen goes back to b6, still maintaining this pin. White can still not take on a4. Oops, why am I not drawing this one? So this is the pin. Knight c5, Magnus is trying to maneuver his knight to a better or a more active square. And sure, I think the e5 square is worse than the c5 square because the knight on e5 doesn't do anything, but just it just looks good on e5, but it doesn't have any great usage. Knight on c5, first of all, it can protect the b3 pawn, but also attack the a4 pawn, and also block this diagonal, which means that black will find it hard to use the queen to put pressure on the d4 pawn. So the knight on c5 is actually a really good piece. And you can now compare this knight to this knight, and you can see that black's knight is actually a little bit passive, yeah. And so that is why in the game knight d7 was played. Black wants to trade this knight off for his own knight. Trading a passive knight for an active knight is always worth it, and that is why he played knight d7 in the game, and b4 was now played. Of course, if white were to take on d7, now there's rook d7, and the second idea that I've mentioned is that black will now double the rooks on the d file and attack the d4 pawn. That is why Magnus didn't take immediately on d7, but instead played b4, defending the c5 knight. And in the game, knight takes c5 was played. Of course, if you just keep the knights here on the board, then probably you'll go something like a3. a3 is also possible, actually, and probably something like queen c3. Now, the main problem is that if you take on c5, there's you'll give white the opportunity to take with the b pawn. I'm not saying that taking with the b pawn here is good, but at least you might give black some chances. Well, of course, in this position, b takes c5 is not good because there's queen b2. But in other words, I'm just trying to say that you should just still maintain this pin and force white to take with the d pawn. And that is why black in the game took immediately on c5, giving white the only option to take with the d pawn. No taking with the b pawn choices because you lose the queen. In the game, d takes c5. First of all, black is damaging white's pawn structure, but the main problem, the main negative side of this trading off the knights like action is that now before white has a very weak pawn on d4, it cannot be pushed like push with d5, or it cannot push c5 to block this diagonal. But now black trading the knights off, but somehow like helping white to get rid of his own weaknesses. And that is the negative side of doing like knight d7, knight c5 idea. But still, black is doing fine here. D takes c5, queen c7, a3, and now let's take a look at this position. Again, evaluate the position and see, like try to figure out what are both sides' ideas. In this position, it's actually equalized, pretty much equalized, but if you guys still remember what I've said at the beginning of the video, that this position, like during the starting position here, I said that black is slightly better, but black will be much more convincing to play with in the future. And now we reach this position, after d takes c5, queen c7, we reach this position. I can tell you that this is an equalized position, completely equalized position. And can you feel that like black is like more convincing to play with? You might say no, because white has like a lot of space on the queen side as well as this very strong d6 square. But actually you can see that white's like pawns are pushed way too far up the board, and sometimes pushing pawns way too high is not a good thing, because you'll create weaknesses, weak squares or weak pawns. And this is what's gonna happen in this position. Right now, black is threatening to go queen f4 actually, which is a really deadly threat, because the queen on f4 can basically attack anything. The c4 pawn, f2 pawn, h2 pawn. I put pressure on everything, and it's really hard for white to get rid of that queen. As for white, even though white does have the d6 square, but it's just impossible for white to get the rook to there. And on the queen side, b5 ideas might happen, but not now, because after takes, you'll lose the c5 pawn. What can white do here if there's no clear idea? Well, in the game, Magnus said, okay, I'm just going to push my pawn and wait for black to do something. And in the game, queen f4 was played. Well, probably here, if black wants to make a draw, rook takes d1, rook takes c1, and rook d8 will be the easiest way to make a draw. But probably black thought that after takes, oops, wait a second. Okay, takes, oh, what's happening? Okay, takes, and after queen c2, he thought that maybe the a4 pawn is gonna be a little bit weak in the future. And actually, but no, because there's queen d4 right now, and if you cannot take because there's just queen a1 mate. And the queen actually is just a very powerful piece on d4, like restricting white's queen from doing anything. And let's say if you go actually here, you should know that the only move for white to hold the draw, at least to maintain the position as to maintain the draw, is with queen c1. Other moves like king f1, g3, or h3 are all losing moves, and you can see why, because after king f1, queen a1, oops, what is happening? Okay, queen a1, king e2, and after queen a3, you'll lose the a3 pawn, and this pawn will just push to victory, and it will be winning for black. That is why in the game, probably I think black, first of all, might not have calculated this line. Second of all, Magnus might have thought that this other option after takes rook d8. Magnus probably thought that after takes, queen c2, queen d4, it was a little bit scary. Probably thought that he can go queen c2 first, and actually it is possible to go queen c2 first. And maybe black thought that after queen c2, this position is still a little bit unclear. Now my a4 pawn is really under attack, and after takes, I no longer have queen d4 ideas. But of course, still we have queen e5 and the same threats. Queen a1 made threats if the queen gets away. Also queen c3 ideas. Of course, white is not going to lose, so does black, and this should be a draw in the end. But in the game, however, black wanted to play on, I guess, and he played queen f4, activating the queen, queen c2, attacking the a4 pawn, you can see that even though black is slightly better here in this position, but the main problem that is not enough for him to win is because of this a4 pawn. This a4 pawn is pushed way too high up the board, and it's like it cannot be protected by other pawns. b5, there's c takes b5 en passant, which means that this pawn has to be protected by the rooks or the queens. But then that will just like lower or like let other pieces become more passive. And that's not a good thing. And what black here needs to do is to give up, try to activate the rooks and give up the a4 pawn and try to gobble up the other white pawns. Let's take a look at what happened in the game. g6 was played, g3, kicking the queen away, queen g4. Actually, queen g4 is a slight mistake, I think. I think here black should have just gone back to queen c7, I guess, and nothing will happen. But if you go queen g4, suddenly I think white is having some chances. Like in the game king g2 was played, you can suddenly feel that this queen on g4 is not that easy to, like, it's somehow getting trapped. Like h4 f3 ideas, like h4 f3 ideas, and the queen can only go to this f5 square. But if the queen goes to f5, then it will allow white to trade the queens off, and that is the main problem with queen g4. That is why in the game queen f5 was played immediately. Black thought that, okay, I'm just gonna trade my queens off and turn into a rook and pawn endgame. At least I can, like, this pawn will no longer have any pressure because it is always being attacked by the queen. And I really want to like activate my rook on a8, so I have to trade the queens off. And after takes, black here took with the g pawn. You can also take with the e pawn, but probably I think black here thought that taking with the e pawn will open up two files and it will like create some winning chances for white. And that is why after here he played g takes f5. But unfortunately, already after this queen g4 move, you can see that just by taking a look at the eval bar, you can see that white is having a lot of like some winning chances already. Queen g4, and we've reached this position here. White decide to go up with the king and king f8. Here, if you want to go e5 to stop white from going king f4, it's not gonna work because there's just rook d6. The rook is just way too active on d6, and if you take, this will just be completely winning for white because white has this pass pawn. At least white will never lose this position, and black will be under a lot of pressure. That is why in the game king f8 was played, and now after rook d6, king e7, at least black can be in time to attack the d6 rook. And actually, Magnus didn't play the best moves here. He should have played rook d6 immediately, and then after king f8, then go rook fd1. Then go rook fd1, double up the rooks on the d file, and after king e7, then go up with the king. Actually, king h3 here just simply wins because king h4, king h5 is just unstoppable. And black will have to take on d6 at some point, but after c takes d6, reaching this position, white will be winning again. But I think this is what Magnus missed. If he had gone like something like rook d6 immediately or king h3, he should be winning. But instead, he played king f3. Probably thought that he was gonna win in any move. I mean, probably thought that his opponent was a 2100, and he thought that he can win like with any kinds of moves. But that is not the case here. In the game, king f8 was played, and suddenly Magnus is no longer winning. Rook d6, king e7. Black is just in time, and the main problem is that now after rook fd1, in the previous position, we saw that in this position, it was white's turn to move, and the king was still on g2, and white played king h3, king h4, king h5. That's just unstoppable. White will gobble up all of the pawns on the king side, and if black were to move the rook to the king side at some point, white always has rook d7. But now the king is on f3. It cannot go to the king side. So does Magnus want to go over it all again? But of course, that's not the case here. After rook a8, actually rook a8 is a blunder here. Actually not a blunder, but giving white a lot of winning opportunities. What here black should have played to hold a very easy draw is to go rook d6. You might say, wait a second, did I just say I just said that like if white were to reach this position with c takes d6, this is a passed pawn, white will be winning. But that is actually a little bit different here, because here black goes king d7 first of all, and if the king were on h3 here, then what will be just like will be winning cleanly. But unfortunately, after c5, here black can go for b6 ideas, and the king is just way too slow. If you go king f4, black will always go f6 to defend the e5 square, and suddenly you can see that white is having a hard time to get into black's position, and this is what will happen. But unfortunately in the game, rook d6 was not played, and it's understandable because like in human eyes, if you trade off and create a pass pawn for your opponent, that is just dead lost. And that is why in the game, rook a b8 was played instead. But after takes, trade into a king and pawn endgame, g4. This is actually just a winning king and pawn endgame, king e7. Like after g4, this is already winning. But after g takes f3, f5, e takes f5 here, this position here, black actually like offered a draw to Magnus. And can you just imagine Magnus here, completely winning position, he agreed to a draw. Like it's just like too normal person. His opponent is just very normal, and he offered a draw, and Magnus just said, okay, let's just like it's a draw. But I just don't know what's happening to him, but maybe he calculated and thought that this was gonna be a draw. But I mean, all moves here can lead to roam. King f4, king f6, for example, and just go h4. Let's say you go h5, black will immediately run out of moves, and after f3, king e6, probably Magnus at that time was a little bit young, and he didn't have enough experience with these kinds of situations or endgame experiences. He thought that this was just a draw, but well, I think maybe during this position he calculated to here, and he thought that this was just a draw. And actually, it is if you play any kinds of moves other than b5. b5 is the move that still wins the position, but it's not an easy move to see. Let's say king d4, b takes c6, b takes c6, and king h5 here. You actually have to calculate a lot of things, but actually reaching this position, you just need to push the pawn and everything, and this will lead to a win. But of course, the endgame part is really complicated, but I think Magnus still can play on. Not like maybe he can agree to a draw after a few moves, like a few tries, but not in this position, because I mean anything can happen here. But like he just agreed to a draw here, and that's actually really shocking. But of course, if it were like the Magnus right now, like the one like the Magnus who is rated 2800, of course, if he were sitting in front of this position, like the older Magnus, if he was sitting like in front of this position, he will definitely know how to win. But again, this game was played in 2000, so Magnus is pretty young at that stage. I mean, yeah, still lack of experience, but right now it's a completely different person. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this position and learned a lot of things from it, at least during that time when my coach taught me this position, especially the endgame part. I thought that was actually really interesting, and Magnus even didn't see how to win this position, and we actually calculated a lot of moves and variations, and in the end, me and my classmates, we actually discussed about this position for a long time. And yeah, alright, so I hope you guys learned something from this position as well, just like me and my classmates did at that time when my coach taught this position to us, analyzed this position with us. And hope you guys learned something and like my videos. Please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!